Hey, if you haven't heard already, March is Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking all things autoimmunity, including who's impacted, what's causing this crazy spike in autoimmune cases, and what do we do about it, both prevention and treatment wise. So, Chris, thank you for being here. And before we get into this intense topic, I want to hear about what you are doing fundraising this month in Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month.
Absolutely. Well, always a joy to be with you, Karen. And, this month is also the time for men's and women's college basketball, March Madness, as it's commonly called. And I love college basketball. It's my favorite time of year. And I really thought to myself, it's time for me to start raising up for the lupus walk that's going to happen in October. How can I wed these two things I care deeply about? And I said, why don't we do this? Instead of just, being in like your office pool or in addition to being in your office pool, have 20 brackets. I don't care. Go nuts with it. I said I want folks to join my groups online for picking your favorite teams, and your only ticket of admission is just showing me that you've donated to the lupus walk. No amount is too small. You can donate $1, you can donate $100. It's all up to you. But once you've donated, you're able to join and just having fun while doing something that helps people. That's as simple as it is. And I can share the information if you want to be a part of it in our episode description. But yeah, just come support a good cause while you're having a great time.
Yeah, we'll definitely put the information in the show notes. I love the idea of tacking on goodwill to something that we're already having fun with and engaging with. So, great idea.
Absolutely.
And I just heard today that now autoimmune diseases are the number one disease category ahead of both cancer and heart disease. So just a few
Wow.
years ago, this wasn't the case. They were number three. And
Right.
now, within a matter of years, it's skyrocketing so fast that it's taken the number one spot. And that's incredible to me.
It truly is incredible. I feel like there's been a meteoric rise, at least in my adulthood, of cases where you hear of folks saying, "Oh, I have lupus, I have celiacs, I have Sjogren's, I have all these various autoimmune diseases." For it to overtake cancer and heart disease, which have held like the number one and two spot for my whole life, as far as I know, it really says a ton about where we are right now. And in my estimation, Karen, I think it's it should be sort of a clarion call to say we need a real urgent intentional funding to go into understanding exactly how these diseases work and what we can do to help people who are living with them.
Yeah, because as we're getting closer in research, they're starting to understand the foundational pieces of what is triggering these diseases, but
Mhm.
we don't have all the connection points. And that's what we're still working through.
Right, right. Yeah, it's just because it's such a fascinating case where, as all of you who live with an autoimmune disease know, no two cases are alike, right? So it's not really like as simple as saying, "Oh, you're showing this checklist, that means it's it." It's really understanding it, and that's part and parcel of why it takes so long to like get a proper diagnosis, and your journey can be riddled with misdiagnoses. So it's really a tough goal, but obviously an urgent one to solve.
Absolutely. At the core of what autoimmunity is, from my understanding, it's you have a genetic predisposition,
Right.
so it's in your genetic makeup,
Hmm.
environmental triggers.
Right.
So environmental triggers can be toxins and overexposure to harmful substances in
Hmm.
our body. A prime example of this is one of the most prominent doctors in functional medicine is
Yeah.
Dr. Mark Hyman.
Okay.
He traveled to China and had mercury built up in his
Ooh.
system.
Okay.
Yeah, which had triggered all of it. I to a woman with Hashimoto's, and her grandparents were dentists.
Yeah, yeah.
So grandparents would like put crowns and do dental work on her mom, and that stuff passes down through birth. And
Whoa.
so this woman who is dealing with these diseases and not understanding the cause, they did a bunch of lab tests and realized, well, she had this metal toxicity build up over generations. They said she was either going to go blind and or develop multiple sclerosis.
My
And those are two like very unique cases. You're
mhm,
traveling to China, you're exposed to dental. But the fact of the matter is there's all these things throughout our daily life, depending on how we grow up, that could have an impact on your health that you didn't even think about
yeah.
before.
Karen, as you're saying this, my mind can't help but to think about all the research and literature I've read on environmental racism and
Yeah,
thinking about, the common practice, just localizing it to the United States
yeah,
of placing, landfills and waste near like black or economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. And so thinking about if and we see this in so many cities where if you're looking at the inner city, there's a disproportionate number of like folks who have asthma or like other respiratory ailments. So as you're talking about these environmental triggers, I can't help but think about environmental racism and the sort of the structure of saying, this group of people get to live in these poor conditions, how that undoubtedly played a part in this phenomenon we're experiencing right now.
absolutely. And to that point, the food disparities
Yeah,
and it's like they're not having access to these healthy like we're preaching about eating clean and but it's
right,
like if you don't have access to clean food and or it's not affordable,
right.
like that's a whole nother level of challenges.
Certain. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, 'cause it's really, a thing for us to say, like, like, "Oh, yeah, I like to start my day with, like, berries every day," but, folks live in, communities where there are no berries sold within a mile of their house. Just thinking about something like the berries are sold, like, already in a juice form, which is not going to give you the sort of vitamins that we're talking about? So just thinking about that disparity.
So, Chris, I know our experiences with lupus, and I
Mhm.
know it's tends to lean towards people with who are African American.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you know if that's the case for other autoimmune diseases too?
That's what inspired my, initial comment because I was thinking about, just the majority of folks, with lupus being, Black women, right? So I was just thinking about
Yeah.
that in particular, but I'm not sure. That's a great question, and I definitely wanna see if that checks out for all other, autoimmune disorders, but I just even if the numbers vary, I just cannot help but think, if we're all of us, regardless of our social location, are eating food that has, just a disproportionate amount of like antibiotics or hormones in there and other things that are affecting the food, there's no way that's not going to show up in this capacity too. Like I'm just curious, just a hypothesis. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of thread that connects between, the ways in which some people are forced to live, not even choose to live, but forced to live, and this rise in number.
Yeah, I'd be curious too. We can look into that more and just circle back for sure.
Hmm. Hmm.
Races is one area, and then I know these diseases absolutely disproportionately affect teenagers and
Right.
young adults into
Right.
their 20s, which is very much the case for you and I, Chris.
Hmm.
I was
Hmm.
diagnosed at 23. My first job out of college, I was a few months in. It was like,
Right.
okay, here we go. And
Yeah.
how, I mean, you were out for a couple, you had
Yeah.
graduated for,
Yeah, I graduated, but I was 24. So I graduated school early. Like I was a young
of
kid in
course you did.
college. So I was out for a little bit, but I was 24. So same story about like starting that first job. Got married super young, so it was like a couple of months married, and just the whole world turned upside down because when you're young, if you hadn't had to deal with any illness before, you really don't think you can get sick. You know what I mean? Like that was my mindset. I will never forget, Karen, going into that. When I was a school teacher, going into that school year, thinking and saying to my wife, "Hey, I don't know," because I was early in my career, so I wasn't getting paid a lot. So I was like, "I don't know if we need to pay for this healthcare thing. Like, I don't get sick, you don't get sick." And can you imagine how much harder this story would have been? Like if her wisdom didn't win over in that conversation and say we need to keep the healthcare. It's just
The
yeah.
wife is always right, right?
Oh yeah, this is just a good policy. It's just a good policy to have.
But yeah, I think that goes back to the challenges of these young kids.
Yeah,
They're navigating their first jobs, social life, maybe some degrees or advanced degrees. And on top of all of that, they're having to figure out health insurance
right.
and to your point, normally it comes on, well, it can come on suddenly or it's gradual and you don't realize that it's coming on when it's happening.
Yes. Yes. And I'm also just thinking about all of the stressors that we have, like it shouldn't really surprise us to see these diseases manifest, you know, during your adolescence or young adulthood, because think about the like inordinate pressure we put on young people now, right? Just thinking if they're trying to get if they're like, let's say, an 11th grader who, they're taking the SAT or the ACT, they want to get into their dream school. Like that's just we put so much pressure on ourselves at that age, and there's this feeling of like it has to happen this way or my life is over, and just think about that pressure doesn't really subside once they get to college. They find a new thing that, they're putting all the marbles in. Then they have to find a job or some sort of you know, graduate degree that they're applying to, med school, law school, whatever it is. It's just all these compounding pressures on top of just the overall, you know, corporate anxiety we all are experiencing. I'm thinking about, COVID certainly catalyzed it and took it to another level. But before COVID, like people were stressed out in 2018. You know what I mean? So it's just thinking about all of these compound disorders in society have to manifest in our actual physical bodies. Where else would they go? You know?
And as you're saying that, I'm realizing that's probably one of the most stressful periods of your life.
Yeah.
Graduating high school and or college, trying to figure out what you're going to do and transition into this new phase of life. Well, if you have these unexpected kind of symptoms or weird things that are happening to your body, like that's enough to put anyone into a tailspin.
Question. No question. And that's and what we described as a pretty, middle class experience. Imagine if the
Yeah.
experience you're having is I know I can't go to college. My family can't afford it, or
Yeah.
my high school didn't prepare me to go to a 4-year college, whatever the situation is. You're going from, being a child one day to having to be a full blown adult trying to like work. Maybe you have a child already. Like these are all just tremendous stresses to have and to carry. And once again, they're gonna show up somehow in the body.
And I love that you bring that up because to your point about it, health insurance, it's like, okay, not every job has health insurance out of it. So how do we navigate that on top of just everything else?
Right, right. It's just as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about that old Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5 song, The Message, like "Don't push me, I'm close to the edge." Just thinking about, just thinking about all these different things going on at the same time. People are just on the edge. Like it's really just a unbearable amount of pressure that's just baked into our society. We need to release the pressure valve somehow.
I cannot help wonder. So, with these three pillars of or factors that need to go
Mm,
into an autoimmune disease, genetic predisposition, environmental triggers, but then there's an immune dysfunction.
right.
And that very much goes back to stress. And
Yes.
I can't help but wonder if part of the reason these diseases are skyrocketing so fast, especially in these young kids, we're talking
Hmm.
12, 15-year-olds who
Right,
are
right.
dealing with juvenile arthritis, type
Hmm.
1 diabetes, like
Hmm.
tough, intense diseases, just painful symptoms. I can't imagine that the stressors aren't triggering more of these diseases.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so much research that has gone into what's known as epigenetics. And so
Yeah.
just thinking about the stress that, we carry that was your grandmama's stress, that was your great grandparents' stress. So just thinking about sort of like the trauma, not just thinking about, oh, I grew up in a house where, God forbid, you had like an abusive parent. I'm thinking about, people whose families had to endure just like massive traumatic situations, right? So I'm thinking about like your family survived the Holocaust, your family survived
Yeah.
Jim Crow, like all these things. It manifests itself not just in your body, but like in what you end up passing down. And like there's a lot of study into, like I say it almost in a silly way, the sort of like, the anxiety that you could have could be something that your great grandchild could experience if it's not really like interrupted. And I think a lot of these anxieties, the stresses that are showing up in the body are connected to sort of that like corporate stress that people have gone through, the sort of like massive moments of terror in our history being passed down generation after generation, finally culminating now in this crescendo moment.
Yeah. Because there's the direct impact of one generation passing it on to the next generation just by physical proximity,
Yes.
but we carry that within our bodies,
Right.
and it comes out in our emotions, our personalities, our relationships,
Hmm.
and absolutely, it just keeps passing down if we're not aware of it and address it head on. That's where I think epigenetics, this was a new term for me when I started researching all of this. And so, Chris, what's your understanding of what epigenetics is?
Well, I first came across the term in Joy DuBois' work. She wrote a book a few years ago, and I can't remember the year exactly, but she wrote a book a few years ago called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. And so the way she described it, she was not so much talking about the medical aspect as much as she was talking about the sort of sociocultural. So the example she used was if you had two children in a class, like a black child and a white child, the white mom is complimenting the black mother on how great her child is doing in school. And rather than saying like, "Oh yeah, like Johnny is so great, like we have big dreams and hopes for him. He's a rock star." Yada yada yada. It's more. She says, "Oh him, he's a knucklehead. He never listens. His room is so messy." Like something that kind of like on its face value like tears him down. And what Dr. DeGroy was pointing to was the way that sort of automatic response to a compliment was tied to the sort of survival behaviors that were learned during enslavement. Because if you were on a plantation and you say, "Oh, Johnny's getting big and strong," if you were to say, "Look, yeah, he is strong," instead of saying things like, "Oh, he can't hear that well," point out some sort of defect or deficiency, Johnny would be taken from that family and sold, or Mary would be taken from that family and sold. So it was just like sort of like these learned survival tactics that really became like a part of how people move through the world. So that was the first way I encountered the term epigenetics, and then I've also reminded about the research where they did like research with lab rats, and you know the first lab rat would get a shock if you pressed a particular button. But by the time they had like sort of the third or second generation of that lab rat, even though there was no shock attached to that button, that rat had never been electrocuted. It knew not to touch that button. So just thinking about these grand horrors that we've experienced as a species in humanity that we self inflicted, right? Like people using power against other people. That energy goes somewhere, right? Like we learn that, and it becomes a part of us, and it gets passed down. Like it doesn't surprise me, although it still breaks my heart that it shows up in people's bodies where you're having, an outrageous number of diabetes and arthritis and lupus and all these other things that significantly can reduce the quality of a person's life.
Yeah. It's amazing how those, and we don't think about them because a lot of times we're not aware of it, but it takes a deep due diligence to really understand, if you're fortunate enough to be able to, what is your family history and how are we emotionally, physically. It even goes back to that woman whose grandparents did dental work on her. It's like,
Right.
if she didn't have the family history, she wouldn't have been able to kind of make that connection.
No.
And fortunately, she was in a place where it's able to figure out the root cause.
Right.
But her having that story helped
Mm,
connected all the dots. And I think that's one of the hardest, most challenging things about this
no
is,
question.
yes, there's absolutely a genetics component of family history, and that's so important.
Mm,
But then there's also just our environment today and
right.
some individual factors that put this all together that make it incredibly challenging to understand these diseases and learn how to effectively manage and hopefully prevent them at
Yeah.
some point.
At some point. At some point. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Because I think about, even in my own story, I remember when I was diagnosed with lupus and you're having the same conversation with like all these different loved ones, right? You're trying to explain what's going on, or they're calling you and asking what's going on. And I remember when I said, "Oh, they said it can be genetic." Like I had on both sides of my family, my mother's side and my father's side, this immediate like, "Oh, well, we don't have anything like that," almost like
You did it for me.
yeah, this immediate like that wasn't from like, it had to be from somebody, so just thinking about even if your family cops up to you and says like there's no way that case was thinking about did your genetic code have the proper ingredients where a disorder like that could thrive.
Yeah. And it's important to have that understanding. But regardless of whether you do, and the beautiful thing about epigenetics is that, yeah, you may have a predisposition and exposure to
Mm,
this where it could be triggered. But the beautiful thing is it doesn't trigger in everyone.
right,
So
right.
you can have what's the autoimmune, but it's like the neurobody, whatever that,
Yeah, yeah, you just like it's like a carrier, but it's not manifesting. Yeah,
yeah, so it can be within you, but if you're not exposed to the right environmental factors,
right.
or you are living a lifestyle that is amazing and can prevent it from ever
No,
triggering,
no,
which was not my case.
no, no, me either. If I could go back, I would tell 12-year-old me like study Tai Chi. Trust me, just go,
Read.
just breathe, slow down, please. Thank me later.
So my point though is the one piece is one component.
Right,
And
right, right.
and if it does trigger in you, there's a lot of stuff on the other side that you can do to help manage it.
Yeah, that's true.
So, for me, I'm on tradition. A lot of people are on traditional Western medications,
Hmm.
immunosuppressants, anti-inflammatories. But and for a while, I think that worked for me.
Hmm.
But then it got to a point where I actually started developing signs of rheumatoid
Mm.
arthritis and Sjogren's,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's what really forced me to be like, okay, I'm on all these medications, but continues. My symptoms intensify. It's not being managed. What do I do?
Right.
And that's where I think it's vital for people to understand, yeah, medications alone can be
Hmm.
great. But if you're struggling and or not happy with how the medications are making you
Yes.
feel, I would say there's a whole nother world out there of lifestyle
Hmm.
changes that can really help.
Yeah.
And for me, the combination was a game changer.
I agree, because I don't think, and I think it's almost like a false division where people say it has to be Western medicine or completely like, homeopathic, you're figuring it out on your
Yeah.
own. No, blend the two worlds, right? So for me, what's made a huge difference is really, especially after my second flare, saying I don't think I need these foods that have brought me comfort my whole life, right? Like I love the great hamburger. I love to have like, lemon pepper chicken wings, whatever. Then I said I don't need these things as much as I need to be able to see like my great grandkids, and just having this sort of mindset to say I'm gonna stick with the medicine the doctor's giving me, but I'm also going to switch up my diet. I'm also gonna try to take more like supplements and things of that nature, like, and making sure that the supplements weren't conflicting with the medicine, because at the end of the day, like, I have developed a trusting relationship with my doctor where I'm not going to say, "I don't know when to take this, I don't believe that I'm gonna take this." Like, I want to be able to, like, cooperate and be on the team or working on this together.
Yeah. And I think that middle or hybrid approach is so important, especially when you're first starting out,
Yeah.
because the medications get a bad rap,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
Western medicine get a
Mhm.
bad rap,
Yeah.
especially as we learn more and move into kind of this medicine 3.0, where we look at the root causes of diseases. However, when you're first starting out, especially, I think you can relate to this, but
Mhm.
especially in my case, where it's like the pain is so intense,
Right.
you can't hardly lift your arms, like
Right.
you can't even be a normal functioning person
Right.
because the symptoms are raging.
Yeah.
And I would say there's no better thing in those early stages to get on the medicine that you need,
Mhm.
work with a rheumatologist that you care about and feel like they care about you,
Mhm.
equal partnership. And then as you progress and learn more about your body and what's causing it, if you really want to go that route, then you can work towards using lifestyle changes to go the full holistic route.
Mhm.
But and on that side, I would say that's where it's functional medicine. That when I looked into it, you're on an elimination diet, and for months, that can be really hard to maintain when you're
Yeah.
going through school and managing first jobs and
Seriously.
going on dates.
Right.
Like,
Trying to live
it's
a
hard
life.
to be on an elimination diet when you can't buy a girl dinner
I'm telling you.
at a restaurant.
Look, I'll have the water.
But there's this middle ground where it's like you can do both to
Yeah.
really achieve a fulfilling life. I think
Absolutely.
you and I are a testament to that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I because I think there's this bombardment of extremes that comes your way when you're first diagnosed, and I think it makes sense because of the panic you may feel, and the uncertainty you may feel, that to hear someone say with such certainty, "Do this and it will work," and to feel you can go into those, doctor's offices and those appointments with a lot of anxiety can kind of distort your ability or willingness to sort of trust the doctor. But I think being able to say, okay, I'm going to establish a rhythm, and then eventually having the opportunity to establish that rhythm, it just allows you to have a full quality of life that otherwise you feel robbed of. I think that's a common bedrock. You remember and nostalgia is not a crime in this sense, where you remember how your life was before all this mess, and you just would give everything to go back to that.
It's easy to go back to pre-lupus or autoimmune disease state and post and compare your life.
Oh yeah.
However, finding that rhythm combination of medicine and lifestyle changes is the magic formula to be
Mhm.
able to live your best life. And more power to you if you can figure it out and do it holistically.
Right.
I'm still juggling and I'm almost 40 and I've been
Yeah.
dealing with this for 15 years. So to have that expectation in your 20s to be able to figure it out is a lot. And
Mm.
I don't want people to put that pressure on themselves.
Yeah. Especially, I think if you're an overachiever, which it feels like these diseases bowl us over, like it finds us. I don't want people to sort of waste their energy being like, I'm gonna defeat this thing single handedly. I just feel like you're setting yourself up for disaster. Just be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself, have some grace towards yourself, and really, embrace the stillness of saying, I don't know the whole picture, but I'm gonna survive the day with hopes that eventually I will thrive.
Absolutely. And Chris, you've told this story before about when you were first diagnosed, and the doctor said,
Oh, this is the best time in human history to be diagnosed with lupus. And of course, I looked at him like he had 3 heads. I just could not understand his enthusiasm about it, but it's really been true. Just hearing and now running a support group and hearing the stories of folks who've been living with this for like 30 years, 40 years, and folks who've really been living with this for a long, long time. Um, you hear about what options simply weren't available that, if you're diagnosed, in 2024, you have so many more medicines available to you. I know when I got diagnosed back in 2012, the medicine Benlysta had just been approved. It was like the first medicine approved for lupus in decades. You know what I mean? And we've had like a couple more since then. But just thinking about, the fact that this does not have to be a death sentence. This doesn't have to be something where you have to be permanently disabled. That absolutely does happen to people. There are complications and lupus warriors who we miss dearly, but at the same time, it doesn't have to be that way for everyone. I mean,
I've had a lot of success with Benlysta,
mhm,
what you mentioned, and also even since we were diagnosed and lost for you 10, 12 years, me a
mhm,
little bit longer, it is amazing how many new medications are coming out.
right.
And the advancement in medical technology,
There it is.
the top functional medicine doctors are saying between AI and some of the other leading technologies, we are coming together at like a revolutionary time in
Wow.
medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one of my books that I'm reading right now I'll show you is um, Outlive by Peter Attia.
Love that. Yes.
And so he talks about how we are shifting from medicine 2.0, which is suppressing symptoms with
Hmm.
medication and after the fact, to medicine 3.0, which is addressing root causes and prevention.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so like it's this whole I mean, back in the day, it's like someone got their leg chopped off by some piece of
Totally.
farming equipment. So, they have all the things to go ahead and take care of that leg,
Right.
whatever that was. But they weren't in that day, they didn't have chronic illness or weren't
Yeah.
equipped to deal with chronic
No
illness. I
chance.
mean, the lifespan was you were done at 40,
Yeah. Absolutely.
Peace.
Yeah. That was it. End of story. Right. End of story.
But now that we're living longer, it gives more time for these diseases to manifest in our lifestyle to impact it. And so all that being said, I'm very hopeful as what you and I have seen in the last 10, 15 years and looking ahead, we're only learning more. And to your original point of, yes, we need more research,
Mhm.
and organizations like Autoimmune Association are absolutely diving into it. But it's an important message to say because now that we are number one, I'm proud of
Absolutely.
myself for being number one, but probably not in this situation.
Yeah, right. Not in this one. I'm okay with not being in the top 10 at all, honestly.
It's just amazing, but the fact that this is growing so evidently, it's
Yeah.
like there's no question that we need to give more attention to these diseases in
Mhm.
this topic.
Yeah. Yeah. It's long overdue, but I do feel like the urgency is coupled with hope. It's not one where it feels like despair is the only option. I think both work in a sense.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing about it is like we have hope with the medical side of things, but also there is so much hope and empowerment in knowing that we can have huge influences on how we feel and how we live through
Yeah,
our lifestyle.
I, yeah, you have agency. I think about when we talk about technological advances, you can watch you can get up in the morning if you chose and watch a fitness instructor on YouTube. Like you could if you're really a tech savvy person, there's different like virtual reality headsets you can use for it. You can Google recipes from anywhere in the world. I think about we've made all these advances where living a healthy lifestyle is far easier now than it ever has been. But it's about making sure that we're creating access points for everyone. Like you're still having folks who are living 20, 30 years behind what we're talking about.
Yeah. So I want to plug for Invigorate because
Yeah.
that is a huge part of what we're trying to do. There's so many costly that aren't covered by insurance,
Mhm.
coaches who are selling you massive packages. There's a lot you can do with the resources at your fingertips, and that's what we try and do at Invigorate is offer free tools, tips, and resources so
Right.
you can improve your journey without breaking the bank.
100%. 100%. Yeah, and it's such an important honestly like a justice work is to make sure that people have the opportunity to engage with initiatives like Invigorate to really get a better sense of how they're going to navigate all of it.
Yeah. And your work in your fundraiser with the Lupus Foundation of America.
Thank you. Just it's really an honor to be able to work alongside other lupus warriors who have this mindset and just really creative brilliance to do fundraising and just trying to do my part.
Anything that we didn't touch on or that you think we left on the table around autoimmune diseases in general and just what people should know or think about when it comes to these crazy rising diseases?
Yeah, I think even for folks who are listening and watching who don't live with an autoimmune disease, I think it's just really important to make sure that you're not overdoing it. That's not the end all be all, but it certainly is a contributor to the situation is making sure that you do have a balanced lifestyle. You're not overworking. You're not getting 3 hours of sleep a night or just pulling all nighter after all nighter. We all need to take care of ourselves. Make sure you're drinking water. Make sure you have good conflict resolution skills. So you're not just holding on to anger from a meeting 3 weeks ago, whatever it is. Like I think all these things that help us just to have a healthy society also will help us when it comes to preventing these diseases. Even if you got all the genetic ingredients already inside of you, helping these diseases not to fully manifest in your life.
I love the examples that you gave because you think about lifestyle and everyone goes to, okay, I need to do yoga and eat more vegetables.
Right, right, right.
But there's so much more to it. You're talking about conflict resolution, so you're not holding all that stress inside you, whether you realize it or not. But that's probably more important than some of the other things we're talking about.
I promise you, I've just been reading from my work with a school, reading this book by Brian Butler, and I'm in the chapter where he's talking about how the brain functions and just thinking about, you know, when your body is under stress, it's supposed to release a little bit of cortisol because stress is not supposed to be like your whole life. But if you're consistently surrounded by stresses from the moment you wake up to the moment you're trying to go to sleep, your body just is consistently under the sense of like, we're under attack, we're under attack. That's so damaging long term, and there's far too many people who live exactly that way.
Chris, I appreciate you bringing this up, but I'm also dying to ask because you're such a like calm, genuine soul. I'm like, were you I was super stressed in my 20s, and I fully believe that's part of what, like, aggravated some of my issues.
Right.
Have I mean, did you have a period like that, or are you just continuously working on
I I I
business?
I joked, um, with a mentor around that time. I think it was after I got diagnosed. I said that I've come to realize myself like that swan on the lake, and it's beautiful and calm, but underneath it's kicking like hell. So I never wanted to let my sweating be obvious, but I care deeply about stuff. So I get very like into like trying to solve it. And at that time I think my ambition was very high. I didn't feel limited in terms of like, oh, I can change the world, that kind of like 20 something energy. And I think as a result, I didn't take enough water breaks, and I think I was in a very high pressured environment, as a school that really did not allow me, didn't assist me in trying to have a balanced life. Like I'm thinking, in the conversation we had uh before we were on air, in that sense of being like, oh, that was a very thoughtful like ask. Like a lot of times when you're new in your career, you're not the recipient of very like thoughtful or intentional requests. It's just like get it done, or if you're a hard worker, you're rewarded with more work. That kind of thing. And so and then prior to that, I think about the culture of the school where I went for undergrad. It was the kind of place where if I saw you and said, "Hey, Karen, how are you doing? Like, what are you up to?" You'd say, "Oh, I have a paper due," and then I would say, "Well, I have a paper and a project due," and then someone would say, "I have a paper, a project, and I'm working on a grant." Like, it just always was a culture of being busy. So, I, it wasn't even until about a couple of weeks ago I was saying to my wife how for most of my life I assumed everyone just worked really hard on a lot of things. I had no idea that that was, like, what everyone was doing, So, if I saw a new, like, like, people watching, like, Love is Blind, like, no disrespect, my wife loves that show too. I'm just like my mindset for a long time has been, "Who has time to watch this stuff?" Like, because even if I'm watching the NBA, I have it on while I'm doing something else. That's always been how I've moved, and so learning now, hopefully being wiser with age and experience, to really allow myself to just do nothing. To be proud of it's Friday night and I'm going to bed like 8 o'clock-ish. That would have felt like, like house arrest 10 years ago. But now in the sense of like this is how I want to live because I want to be available to the things and to the people that matter.
Me too, I don't wanna do anything but sit on my couch.
Done. That's it. I've had enough fun running the streets. I'm done. I'm cashed out.
Yeah, I do wanna circle back though, because I think you bring up a really interesting point when it comes to stress.
Yeah.
We tend to think about it as running ragged, you're filling up your schedule too much, but there's also the other piece of it, which is different in what you're talking about, is deeply caring about so much and the outcome necessarily isn't it's not necessarily a bad thing,
Right.
but you can carry the weight of the world on your
No
shoulders if
question.
you were beyond passionate about something. And it's so important to that's great, but just
Mhm.
being mindful about how much energy and effort you're putting into this whatever thing that you're
Right.
trying to do.
Right. Yeah, yeah, it's really that sense of not trying to be Superman,
Yeah.
or Wonder Woman, like really understanding that it's okay to say, I'll pick this back up tomorrow. That's a healthy thing, and for those of us who are now, supervising people or work with a team of people, how do you create a culture of, we'll pick this back up on Monday? Like how do you create that culture? Are you still proud of a culture where, that person is going to answer a call at 2 a.m. or check that email, you know, like, at 10 p.m., whatever it is, like, it's always available culture, or do we want us to have rested, recharged, balanced people working on our team? That's just a choice. That's the decision you have to make. 'Cause I don't know if we can continue to keep going at this pace without folks really breaking down. Like, this is just as bad as it is to live with autoimmune disease. I think we're still at the check engine light. I think we have an opportunity to really, slow down and take care of what we need to take care of. But we continue to go at this pace, we're all gonna break down.
Yeah. The silver lining of COVID was it
Right.
really made us at least question how much we were investing in some of this stuff. It is up to us on an everyday basis to set that culture, create that culture. This can wait till tomorrow. We don't need to boil the ocean in 1 week,
Right.
or whatever the time frame is. The world's not going to fall down. And if it does, we're screwed anyway. So be it.
No one's gonna care about this email if the world ended tomorrow. This email is not gonna be important.
Yeah. The biggest takeaway that I learned from my lupus journey and
Mhm.
autoimmune disease journey is do what you can. And as soon as you feel like you are overextending yourself, you are doing everyone a disservice and yourself a disservice
Mhm.
if you're not taking the time to take care of yourself.
No question. No question. Yeah, like, I think we underestimate how much the world needs us to be our full self, not just, part, or, like, not just operating on E the whole time, the engine smoking, but you're here. No, go rest.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Chris, this was an amazing conversation. I appreciate getting back to basics since it is Autoimmune Awareness Month.
For sure.
And before we drop off, you gotta say one more thing about the fundraiser you're doing. And I will reiterate that we'll put all the information in the description, but take it away.
Absolutely, yeah, there's no, donation, too small or too large for that matter. We're just raising money to help, end lupus. We have our Walk to End Lupus, in October, and this is a really great cause where you're able to have fun, support your favorite women and men, college basketball team, or just fill out your bracket. So also just donate, to a worthy cause, so you can't lose. So thank you in advance for just giving what you can, and let's work together to end lupus.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. For everyone else, drop your questions about autoimmune diseases. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Chris, again.
Great. Thank you, and y'all take care.